Okay, so we're going to talk about Napoleon a little bit today. First of all, the reason why we need to talk about Napoleon is he kind of brought the French Revolution to a conclusion. Things kind of waffled around for a few years after the death of Danton and Robespierre in 1794, and then they called Napoleon in 1797 to put down a riot in Paris, and then eventually they called him back in 1799 to put down another riot in Paris because of the fledgling, democratic government. And the time he put down the riot in 1799 was the time that he decided he was going to stay and declare himself first consul and take over the government at that point. It wasn't all at once that he became a dictator, but through a series of um, military triumphs and political triumphs. By about 1804, he was pretty much the dictator and leader of the French Empire. The value of Napoleon was mostly that he was able to spread the ideals of the French Revolution throughout a big region of Western Europe. The drawback to Napoleon is in order to spread those new ideals, he was a dictator who, cost millions of lives through military efforts and other purges. At the end of the day, the consensus is not either in one direction or the other on Napoleon. But let's talk about him a little bit. So his early life, he was born in 1769 in Corsica. He had the benefit of being an outsider to French life. Corsica had only been annexed by France in 1768. So it was a new territory to the French realm, and he was, definitely on the outskirts of all the political intrigue and everything else that was going on in France in his early life. He got the opportunity to go to France. He spoke Italian early in his life, but he got the opportunity to go to France at about 9, to go to a school to learn French and to learn the basics. Then by about the time he was 11 or 12, he was enrolled in one of the finest military schools in France. Like all renowned generals, a lot of the reason he was able to kind of progress so quickly was luck, and a lot of it was his ability. One of the things that he credits a lot of his later success for was that he studied, really diligently military history. Um, he said, in all 60 battles he fought, there were no surprises. So he was an avid studier of military history. He had a wonderful memory. He had a wonderful memory for details. Um, and he always let the details kind of serve his agenda rather than getting bogged down in the details. I guess there was one story about how at one point in his career he sent uh, some, captains in his army to go count every gun that was on the coast of France, and they came back with a report. And he looked at it very quickly and he said, "Well, you forgot those 4 guns that are behind encampment in this little town on the coast of France." So the point is um, that he remembered every detail, and he used those details to kind of serve his agenda. His personality, he had a strong personality, and if you read some of the little vignettes that I gave you, he never repeated anything. He had a ton of confidence, and he had a ton of talent for math, science, remembering details, spatial ability, and all that kind of stuff. So, from a very young age, people knew that he was pretty bright. Um, Coupe d'oil, that's another topic we talked about in class already, which means power of the glance. And like I said to you, Wayne Gretzky scored more goals and had more assists than anybody in NHL history. And when they asked him how it was that a guy who wasn't as fast as the fastest skaters and wasn't as nearly as strong as the strongest athletes, how he could score much more than everyone else, he said that. other hockey players skate to where the puck is. I skate to where the puck's going to be. So Napoleon had a similar type of talent, right? He fought the battle that was going to be, not the battle that was. And one of the things that he's really credited with in changing military history is that he always had the time advantage. And if I can sort of explain it correctly, it sort of means this. Um, he had other people running on his schedule, so he dictated the action on the battlefield to such a degree that he always had the opposing commanders reacting to his action rather than his, having to react to their action. And so, if you're the first mover and if you're the one who's running the tight schedule, oftentimes you get to control the situation much more than others. I spoke briefly about the Napoleonic Code. The Napoleonic Code was probably the most lasting benefit that came from Napoleon's rule. Napoleonic Code was just a series of laws that were spread out through the whole Napoleonic realm. The law of persons, the laws of property, the laws of property acquisition, and the laws of civil procedure. And I'm not going to go into details about the 4 books, but the reality is that that all of Western Europe had a rule book after Napoleon was through with it. And with that rule book, it was able to have standardized procedures, standardized laws, standardized ways of getting divorce, standardized ways of acquiring property and willing property. And the point of that is so lasting is that when everybody knows the norms in the playbook, it's much easier to engage with people socially and civilly and all of that kind of stuff. So the Napoleonic Code was one of the great lasting legacies of Napoleon's rule. Brief military history. I think the best way to kind of talk about Napoleon's military attributes and qualities is to probably talk about his masterpiece battle, which was in Austerlitz in 1805. I put a little map of Austerlitz here, and the diagram are in the presentation, and I'll try to talk you through it as best I can. I'm going to talk through it in class as well. But the gist of Austerlitz was that in 1804, Napoleon was planning to cross the English Channel and attack England. The Austrians and the Russians knew that this was the case, and they started to move on France from the east. Napoleon knew his army was outnumbered, and he couldn't go up against the British, the Austrians, and the Russians at the same time. So he took the bulk of his troops from the coast, from the English Channel, moved them towards Vienna, where he knew that the Austrians were moving up the Danube River. And he engaged the Austrians without the help of the Russians at that point by the Danube River. At that point, he beat them soundly. He beat Mack, who was the Austrian general, and then he pursued him all the way to Vienna. He took Vienna. He took all the stores of weapons in the strategic city of Vienna. And at this point, his soldiers were absolutely exhausted. And, one of the things he did to kind of spur them on was saying, I know you're exhausted, but every day you push on is a day that we don't spill blood. So he knew that time was of the essence in trying to get to the Austrians and the Russians before they could kind of unite and use their overwhelming troop numbers to, defeat the French. So from Vienna, he pursued the Austrians north. And this is where, the genius of Austerlitz kind of took place. He actually occupied the high ground early on. And, behind him, to the right, was a body of water that kind of sat in a swampy area. And to the left, was a plain where he could bring in reinforcements. So the idea was this. He retreated off the high ground into the swampy area, and it was December 1805. and so he knew that that time of year, usually in that swampy area, there was a huge fog um, in the mornings. And so the idea was that by retreating off the high ground, it was a sign that they were weak. It was a sign that they were going to get out of there before the Russians could come and assist the Austrian army in defeating Napoleon. And so what he did was, it was a strategic retreat. And in the fog, he moved many of his soldiers, and he got reinforcements to the left flank of this picture. And so in the morning, when the Austrians smelled weakness in the French, a weakness that Napoleon had wanted them to smell, and they descended into the swampy land that the French retreated into, then the French attacked them through the center and reoccupied the high ground. And when they reoccupied the high ground, then they had divided the Austrians from their Russians who were coming to support them on their left flank. In any event, by dividing the Russian and Austrian army and occupying the high ground, he was able to put back many, many charges and defeat a force that had vastly superior numbers. And that was kind of his masterpiece. I'll try to draw it on the board in class. But the point is, he lured them in with a simple plan. He used timing and terror in the ground and the weather conditions to his advantage. He was able to split the forces, and by splitting the forces and occupying the high ground, he was able to repel many charges. And at the end of the day, he turned both the Austrians and he turned the Russians around to flee back to Russia. But he made the Austrians surrender unconditionally. And so the Austerlitz is really kind of his masterpiece battle. And I know it's pretty difficult to imagine when I'm just sitting here talking to you. But if you look at the diagram, you can see the blue French forces dividing the red Austrian forces to the south and the red Russian forces to the north. Okay, so that'll be it. And then after that diagram, you see that there's a brief YouTube video of each one of his battles set to music. So you can watch that and see kind of how he progressed through Europe from 1797 all the way up until 1815 when he was done. Okay, so we'll end this video now.